Checks and balances. Amos is totally about that. Alas, for those at ease in Zion, and for those who feel secure in Mount Samaria, the notables of the first of the nations, to whom the house of Israel resorts, Amos chapter 6 is not letting up. Even in chapter 6, the Israelites do not look good. This is actually one of the most interesting things in the Bible that makes it somewhat unique as a sacred text. One commentator puts it like this: the Jewish people included stories and prophecies that do not tell people how wonderful they are, but rather how complex and human they are. Collectively and canonically, they portray themselves as being bad in the sight of the Lord. This is fascinating because this means that the Bible is, in essence, self-deprecating. It's extremely powerful because the uniqueness of a self-deprecating sacred text tells us that we are not essentially always good people. And yet, in light of that, God still values us, not despite, in light. Characters in the Old Testament and New Testament grow throughout the Bible. But if you watch any sitcom on television, you know that for the characters to grow, there has to be some kind of cringe-worthy conflict that shows up within the story. And certain characters are meant to embody this cringe-worthiness. But still, God values these people. And for the prophet, since God values others despite the conflict, we should too. After so many generations, they even forgot about God's wrath against the Israelites who built the sacred cow. They messed up, and throughout the Bible, they kept messing up. When they mess up, they get called out. And that's part of the story. It's part of growth. So what kind of growth is Amos going for in this text? In the beginning of chapter 6, consumption and luxury are still the issues he wants to address from chapters 1 through 5. For Amos, consumption in light of luxury is a sin. But let's clarify what luxury is for the prophet. Verse 4, alas for those who lie on beds of ivory and lounge on their couches and eat lambs from the flock and calves from the stall, who sing idle songs to the sound of the harp and like David improvise on instruments of music, who drink wine from bowls and anoint themselves with the finest oils, but are not grieved over the ruin of Joseph. The last part in chapter 6 is the key phrase. At this point of the text, some of us are going to start to feel guilty over the things that we own based off of this text. It's like watching Marie Kondo on Netflix and then immediately throwing a bunch of trash bags full of stuff in your car. If you haven't heard of the show, the concept is this. You engage with something that you own, meaning you pick it up or you look at it, and then you ask yourself, does this make me happy? And if your reaction is yes or no, that determines whether you keep something or not. The challenge with this concept is that it's possible that all of your stuff can make you happy. So then you're going to keep your stuff. And for some people, they have no care to throw stuff out, making their families upset at them for not keeping their family heirlooms. The point here is that the process of processing the value of your stuff can be challenging. Why is this? Why does stuff make us happy? One reason for this is because our stuff gives us a kind of value. Think about it. If you own a home or a car, even an instrument or even jewelry for that matter, banks value you based off of those things. If the bank were to repo your home if you owed a bunch of money, they wouldn't take you, they'd take your stuff. And it's devastating when that happens. It's devastating when a fire hits your home and all your things are destroyed. Because on some level, stuff we possess hold a piece of us in those things. While there is a sort of beauty to this, the unhealthy version of this value system is what Amos wants his people to grow out of. Keep note that the prophets don't like any form of luxury at all. They believe in the same system that the Israelites had in the wilderness when they were instructed to collect manna. You only take enough for the day. And on Friday, before the Sabbath, you only took enough for 2 days. If you took too much, your manna would rot. So the prophets don't like indulgence and hoarding at all. Because at some point, our stuff and the value that they bring can turn our hearts to think that we are more valuable than others. Amos tries to shut this down fast. He mentions the other nations because Israel thinks that they are protected by God despite those people. And any invading force is going to attack the surrounding nations before they attack them. Even more so, since they have God on their side, God's protection will prevail. But this is what he says in verse 2. Cross over to County and see. From there, go to Hamath the Great. Then go to Gath of the Philistines. Are you better than these kingdoms? Or is your territory greater than their territory? Amos is telling them that they, like the surrounding nations, are just as susceptible to God's wrath. In fact, his last statement in verse 2 tells them that they are held even more accountable. Don't get me wrong, these are still people that God values greatly. And it's because God values them that God demands that they value others just the same. But when luxury and poverty exist in the same space, that space and practice is a complete contradiction to God's value system. And the nations of Israel should be the first to enact God's value system. Notice also, Amos doesn't speak to individual leaders. He speaks to the nation. Amos is not trying to attack the individual leaders themselves. He's trying to change the hearts of all of the elite. Other prophets, like those of the judges, did attack certain leaders. The difference here is that Amos doesn't just hold the leader accountable. It holds every elite member of the society. Because while other prophets had to deal with a tyrant leader, Amos is dealing with a complacent subculture. So Amos has to change not just a person, but an entire culture. And the way he tries to change their hearts is to point out their system as one that values the wrong thing. The system values consumption as it relates to rugged individualism. And if God values all people, then rugged individualism contradicts God, which means rugged individualism won't exist in heaven as well. What's also interesting is that this text also calls out the idea of our security. This is challenging for us because if you are currently engaging in any conversation with anyone, either online or in person, it's likely that you've either witnessed, been a part of, or created damaging narratives against someone else's politics, someone else's beliefs, someone else's practices. Our world is full of fabricated narratives built to help instigate a devaluing of a group or a person. Today, we call this propaganda. This is why the prophet shows up. The prophet calls us out in our propaganda. It calls us out on our value system. It calls us out when we begin to build narratives against one another. God values people over stuff. God values people over security. God values people over how we see them. So God calls us to value people the same. God calls us to protect people from harm. God calls us to live in service by fighting for the rights of those who can't fight for themselves. God calls us to live in service to provide resources and educate our people about injustice in the world. God calls us to value through the practice of working for the poor, but he also calls us to plead with the privilege for repentance. This is the kind of relationship that God is calling us to. Conciliation and forgiveness on the solid rock of firm values. God values created beings and God is not going to let up on that. But since God values all, there's still a chance for us to change our hearts to do the same. So my challenge this week is this. What do you have to change in your value system to value others as God values them? Do you have to remove yourself from the propaganda? Or is there a shift in your heart that you have to meditate and practice on? Either way, let's do this together. Because here at Long Beach, we're here to do life together.